I agree with what you said earlier, Lisi. Like that's kind of the example I was trying to set before is I think that too much stress and too much pressure is actually not helpful. I think that likewise, though, too little is not helpful. And so it's really difficult to find that balance.
This is Climbing Gold. But the question is, do you think that adding all that extra pressure on yourself actually helps? Because like so in this case with this specific project that you were working this season, you can imagine a different world in which you only went out there on the decent days, you let it go till the fall if that's the way it played out, but then you also worked on some of your new projects, the 5G or something like random crags,
Mm-hmm.
like local crags. And realistically, that probably just would mean that you'd send both projects in the fall, and your overall year, your overall tick list would be the same. It would just be slightly different timing. And your overall level of fitness would wind up being the same. And so, like, long term, you're kind of like, it's basically all playing out the same. Do you need the enormous personal stress? And I would ask your wife, like, does Shayna think you need the enormous personal stress? Because that's the real, because it's like, yeah, if it helps you send,
Well,
I'm not trying to
yeah.
project too much because obviously I've like done the same mind games with myself with
Mm-hmm.
soloing and with all kinds of things where you're like, this matters. I'm going to do this thing. And you're kind of like, does it freaking matter? Like, do you need to put that on yourself?
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, um, I can say that I think it does matter for me. Uh, and the main reason why I say that is because I've been climbing for long enough that I've kind of seen the trends. I've seen the way that I perform under too much stress, which is definitely not a good thing. I've also seen the way that I perform under too little stress. And I think I would ask you, like, think about the best climbers in the world, and would you characterize them as generally being having some level of stress in their life or being stress free? Chris Sharma cannot be
Notable
included in
exception.
this.
Yeah,
Notable
but
He's
so
exception.
notable. Yeah.
except yeah,
Yeah,
so if you exclude Chris Sharma, then yeah, most of the best climbers in the world are complete psychos. But or like totally neurotic or like putting way too much stress on themselves. And myself included, I suppose. But I don't know. But then you add a couple people like Chris. I'm sure there are other people like him. I'll have to think about it more. But they're definitely.
Well,
Oh, what about like Sean Rabbitoe? I mean, come on. Sean and Chris are two extreme outliers where they just give
that's
no
true.
Fs and they're just the best climbers in the world. So they're kind of like,
Mm,
it's obviously not
that's true.
required.
well, I,
Mhm.
I would say like two things I'm curious about. One, the research shows opposite of what you're saying, Jonathan, actually, that
Mm,
when people like put a lot of stress on themselves to perform, that they actually perform worse
Right.
than if they like let go of the attachment. But then
But I
two,
think hold on. I think that's true in a specific case, like in the moment of the test, they might perform worse. But I think what Jonathan's doing is putting stress on himself so that he works hard the whole season. If it gets you out of bed every day and keeps you grinding for 6 weeks, you're kind of like, well, overall, you're going to do better grinding 6 weeks
mhm.
than Anyway,
I mean, I think the other question I have for you, Jonathan, is like, let's say that randomly, even though there were a few weather day, decent weather days in the schedule, and you put all the circumstances were the same for your last project, right? Like you were trying hard, you're waking up in the middle of the night, you're fixing your finger, etc. But the weather comes in earlier, you don't send. How do you feel about yourself?
Mm.
we wouldn't be able to ask him because he wouldn't be with us. It would be
Uh,
the end.
Like no fault of your own, you
yeah,
could
yeah.
definitely send the route. Does that impact your view of how you are as a climber, how you
Oh my
perform?
God, yeah, absolutely. And I mean the reason that I can say that with confidence is because that's how my last season went. I
Yeah.
had three projects in a row that all, I mean, two really particularly. The third one I kind of was just blown out emotionally, so I kind of gave up if I'm honest. But weather played a small part in that. But the first two were like kind of things where I was like one in particular, the one that I care about the most, I fell at the anchor, like literally on the very last move going to the anchor of like a 45-meter route. And then the following day it rained and it was wet for the rest of the season. Like it was my actual last opportunity to send that season. And if I had two or three more good weather days, I mean, who knows? Like that's something you learn, I think, when you're really deep into this pursuit is that there you can never count your eggs before they hatch. Like I can't tell you how many times I've been like, oh, I just need two more days, and then you actually need 10, But let's imagine that I only needed a couple more. It was completely out of my control as to whether or not at that point whether or not I could send, but I still felt like, yeah, I was upset. I was bummed, you know? And I think that that's totally normal. And I think that, like, I don't necessarily think that this is constructive, but I do think that, like, you know, I made that into a way to feel like it was due to my performance and not to the circumstances. Because, you know, technically, if I was a little stronger, I would have needed fewer days, and so I would have gotten done before the end of the season. You know, I mean, there's ways to like construe the situation into finding a way to hate yourself. but I guess what I'm trying to say is like and I agree with what you said earlier, Lisi. Like that's kind of the example I was trying to set before is I think that too much stress and too much pressure is actually not helpful. I think that likewise, though, too little is not helpful. And so it's really difficult to find that balance. And generally speaking, I think that what I've observed is that performance is really about removing any restriction from allowing your body to just like do its thing. Like imagine if you could show up at the cliff and you could completely turn off your brain and you just let all the training and all the preparation that you had in your body just like go to work. But there's that mental aspect too, right? That makes it stressful to, you know, go to the same crag a million times, to show up and you're always thinking about failure or success. And, you know, like while you're on the route and you're resting and you've gotten to that higher spot that you've never been before, then there's all these thoughts circulating in your head about like, you know, can I screw this up? Can I not screw this up? So I think that being your absolute best version of yourself, it's all standing on the foundation of your physical body being ready. But when it comes time to perform, it's all about removing any barriers that your mind might be creating for you. And that largely has to do with finding that balance between fighting, because you have to fucking try hard to do these things that are really at the limit of your ability, but also like kind of releasing, you know, like releasing the idea of success or failure, or, you know, if you got that foot placed perfectly, or if you grab that handhold perfectly, or if the conditions are right, or all that kind of stuff, you know.